You are making a catastrophic mistake.
The red and blue lights were already strobing across the side of the silver Tahoe when it happened, and the image that will stay with you long after this story ends is not the gun, not the handcuffs, not the crowd of bystanders with their phones raised and their mouths open. It is the grocery bag still gently swinging from Marcus Webb's left hand, a box of strawberry cereal visible through the thin plastic as a man in full police uniform leveled a loaded firearm at his chest in a grocery store parking lot on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. For one single second, Marcus didn't move. His hands came up slowly, palms out, fingers spread wide, and the grocery bag swayed. And inside the Tahoe, 3 feet behind him, his 4-year-old daughter Chloe was watching a cartoon and giggling at something only she could hear, and the world was a perfectly ordinary place to her, and Marcus Webb was going to make absolutely sure it stayed that way. This is the story of the gun that ended a badge and the father who never once raised his voice and never had to. 20 minutes before the lights came on Oak Creek Plaza was exactly what it always was on a Tuesday afternoon in late August. A wide, sun-baked stretch of asphalt running along the front of a Denver suburban strip mall, the kind of place where the parking lot is too big and the cart return is always too far away and the air smells faintly of warm asphalt and someone's fast food from 2 stores down. The light was the particular golden kind that only happens in Colorado in late summer, angled and heavy, the kind that makes everything look a little more cinematic than it actually is. Marcus Webb had been loading groceries for about 4 minutes. He moved the way he did everything with a quiet, practiced efficiency that looked unhurried but wasted nothing. Fresh produce first, then the heavier canned goods, then the gallon of milk wedged carefully against the wheel well so it wouldn't slide, and finally, the cereal. Chloe's strawberry cereal, the one with the cartoon bear on the box, the one she had specifically pointed to with both hands in the cereal aisle while making a sound of pure unqualified joy. He was wearing a faded gray sweatshirt, athletic shorts, and a worn baseball cap pulled low against the afternoon glare. Nothing about him to a reasonable eye suggested anything other than what the scene showed: a father, a grocery run, a hot parking lot, an ordinary day. The efficiency of his movements was there if you knew what to look for, the economy of motion that comes from 15 years of protecting the most powerful people in the country in the most dangerous situations imaginable. But you would have to know what you were looking for to see it. Most people wouldn't. Most people didn't. Inside the Tahoe, Chloe had her headphones on and her tablet propped against her knees and was entirely blissfully elsewhere. Marcus could see her in the rear window reflection every time he turned back to the cart, that small, round-cheeked face tilted slightly upward, lit by the screen glow, completely at peace with the world. Today, Marcus Webb was not a federal agent. Today, he was just a father running errands on his day off. That distinction was about to cost a man 12 years of his life. On the far side of the parking lot, idling in the shadow of a row of parked cars near the lot's entrance, Officer Dale Pruitt sat in his black and white patrol cruiser and drummed his fingers slowly on the steering wheel. Pruitt was 44 years old, 12-year veteran of the Oak Creek Police Department, white barrel-chested with a thick neck and the particular kind of face that has spent too many years arranged in an expression of permanent suspicion. His record told a specific story, if you knew how to read it. 9 excessive force complaints over 12 years. Not one of them resulting in disciplinary action, all of them quietly absorbed by the department's union machinery and filed away in a place where records go to die. There was also a documented pattern noted by 3 separate internal affairs investigators over 5 years of racially biased traffic stops in the Oak Creek coverage area, a pattern that had produced a series of memos, that produced a series of meetings that produced absolutely nothing at all. But records don't tell you what a man believes. What Pruitt believed, genuinely, foundationally, in the part of himself he never examined, because examining it would require an honesty he had never developed, was that his badge was a tool of social order. Not legal order, social order. The way he understood it, The world had a natural arrangement, a set of invisible lines that separated who belonged where, and his job, as he had privately articulated it to the men in his department, he trusted was to enforce those lines. To make sure the arrangement held, to make sure the people who belonged somewhere stayed there, and the people who didn't were reminded of that fact quickly and clearly. He was not scanning the Oak Creek Plaza parking lot for crime. He was scanning it for disruption, for anything that violated his internal geography of the neighborhood, anything that didn't fit the picture he carried in his head of how things were supposed to look out here. When his gaze landed on Marcus Webb, it held. The calculation that followed happened in less than 3 seconds, and it was not complicated, and it was not rational, and it was not connected to anything that had actually happened in the parking lot. It was simply this: a black man in casual clothes was loading expensive groceries into a $90,000 luxury SUV in a predominantly white affluent zip code. And that picture did not compute in Pruitt's geography. And the only explanation his internal map offered for the discrepancy was that the car was stolen, or the man didn't belong there, or both. He did not run the plates. He did not call dispatch. He did not observe a traffic violation or a suspicious behavior or anything that any court under any standard would later recognize as articulable suspicion. He simply put the cruiser in gear because he was a man who had been doing this for 12 years and had never once been stopped. The cruiser came in fast and angled hard, cutting across the empty lane behind the Tahoe and boxing Marcus in against the cart return with the aggressive precision of a man who had done this many times before and had never once worried about the aftermath. The red and blue lights snapped on that harsh strobing flare that is designed specifically to disorient, to command attention, to immediately establish that whoever is behind the lights is in charge of the next several minutes of your life. Marcus felt it before he consciously processed it. 15 years of high-stakes training producing an instantaneous physiological response that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with clarity. His heart rate held steady, his senses sharpened. He had the last grocery bag in his hand, and he set it down slowly in the trunk, and he turned around with his hands already visible, already clear of his pockets, already communicating compliance to a situation he had not created. The cruiser door swung open and Pruitt stepped out, and the first thing Marcus clocked was the hand already resting on the butt of the holstered Glock, not drawn yet, but there resting, announcing itself. The posture was wide feet set far apart, chin up, the particular body language of a man performing authority for an audience he believes will not question it. The people in the parking lot began to notice. A woman pushing a cart toward the store entrance slowed her pace and stopped watching. A teenage boy on a bench near the entrance pulled his phone out and held it loosely at his side, not yet recording, but ready. An older man in a polo shirt walking his dog along the edge of the lot turned and stood still, his dog sitting automatically beside him, as if it too sensed a change in the air. The audience was not Pruitt's ally. Pruitt didn't know that yet. Marcus spoke first, his voice carrying the particular quality of a man who has been trained to de-escalate rooms that are already on fire, calm, clear, entirely without the nervous edge that Pruitt was accustomed to producing in people. He asked what the problem was. He told Pruitt his daughter was in the back seat. He asked what he could help with, and the question was genuine, and the steadiness of it seemed to land on Pruitt like a personal insult. Pruitt moved closer, and his eyes were doing what they always did, dragging over the car, over Marcus's clothes, over the groceries in the trunk, looking not for evidence of a crime, but for confirmation of a story he had already decided was true, and finding nothing and being furious about it. Marcus Webb had spent 15 years learning exactly how to speak in situations where speaking the wrong word could end in violence, and the skill he had developed, the one that looked like calm, but was actually a highly disciplined, constantly recalibrated form of precision, was on full display in that parking lot, and it was completely wasted on Dale Pruitt because Pruitt was not listening to the words. He was listening to the fact that the words existed at all. Marcus stated his position clearly and without aggression. He had committed no traffic violation. He was parked legally in a public lot, and under state law, an officer was not authorized to demand identification or vehicle keys without reasonable articulable suspicion that a crime had been committed. He used the exact phrase, reasonable articulable suspicion, with the unhurried ease of someone for whom legal language is a working vocabulary, not a performance, and he watched Pruitt hear it and felt the precise moment when Pruitt's face shifted from irritated to genuinely dangerously angry. Because to Pruitt, the words weren't legal literacy. They were defiance. The calm, unbroken eye contact wasn't confidence. It was a challenge. The fact that a man he had already decided was beneath him was standing in a public parking lot and reciting the Fourth Amendment without flinching was to Pruitt a profound offense against the order he believed it was his job to enforce. He had spent 12 years cultivating a very specific kind of interaction. One where he arrived and people submitted quickly and without asking questions, and the man in front of him was doing neither, and there were phones recording it and the audience was growing. Pruitt stepped into Marcus's personal space, closing the distance deliberately, using his physical bulk as a tool the way he always did with people who didn't immediately fold. And then the word came out. Boy slipped effortlessly, without calculation, the way a thing slips out when it has been living very close to the surface for a very long time, spoken low, just between the two of them, designed to land like a hand on Marcus's chest and push. Marcus felt it. The cold spark in his sternum was real, the flash of anger that any human being would feel when a man with a gun calls them that word in a parking lot in front of their child. But his training closed over it, the way water closes over a stone smoothly and completely, and without disturbing the surface. Emotion was the enemy of survival in a volatile situation. He had known that for 15 years. He had trained it into his body until it was reflex. He told Pruitt he was escalating without cause. He told him to step back. His voice dropped an octave when he said it, and it carried something that wasn't quite a warning and wasn't quite a command, but was absolutely unmistakable to anyone who had ever been in a room with genuine authority, not the performed kind Pruitt carried around like a costume, but the real kind, the kind that comes from having been trusted with things that actually matter. What Marcus could not know, and what the narrator can tell you now, is that 3 of the phones in that parking lot had been recording for the past 90 seconds, and the audio was clear enough to pick up the slur. And those recordings would be played in a federal courtroom 6 months later to a jury that would listen to them in complete silence, with their faces arranged in expressions of controlled revulsion, and Dale Pruitt would be sitting 10 feet away, staring at the table in front of him, unable to look up. He didn't know that yet. He just knew that a man he had decided did not belong here was refusing to be diminished, and the audience was watching, and his authority was crumbling in front of people he was supposed to be above. The sound of a holster unsnapping in a quiet parking lot is not dramatic in the way movies suggest. It doesn't boom, it doesn't reverberate, but it has a quality to it that cuts through ambient noise and registers in the human nervous system at a frequency below conscious thought, and every person within 30 feet of Dale Pruitt heard it and felt something drop in their chest before they fully understood what they were hearing. Pruitt drew his Glock 19, and he did not keep it at low ready, and he did not point it at the ground, and he did not use the controlled de-escalation posture that every use of force trainer in every police academy in the country teaches as the minimum standard for a non-confirmed threat. He leveled the barrel directly at Marcus Webb's chest center mass, and the distance between the muzzle and the man was approximately 5 feet, and his finger was inside the trigger guard. Someone screamed a woman near the cart, return a sharp, involuntary sound that echoed off the face of the building. Another woman physically grabbed her child by the shoulder and pulled him behind the bumper of a parked minivan. The teenage boy's phone came up all the way, now both hands recording. The man with the dog took 3 steps backward without taking his eyes off the scene. The parking lot, which had been the ordinary background noise of an ordinary afternoon, went very quiet in a way that made the cartoon audio leaking faintly from the Tahoe's rear door sound obscene in its cheerfulness. Inside the vehicle, Chloe laughed at something on her tablet. She had absolutely no idea. Marcus Webb's mind ran the assessment in the span of a breath, not as a conscious calculation, but as a trained response that had long since been moved out of the realm of thought and into the realm of reflex. Distance, 5 feet, cover none, threat level. Critical actor emotionally compromised, stance. Unbalanced, trigger. Discipline, absent. Probability of discharge, given any sudden movement, unacceptably high. And then the second assessment, the one that overrode everything else, the one that was not tactical, but was the most important thing in the world. His daughter was 3 feet away in a car seat, and she was 4 years old, and she was watching a cartoon, and he was going to make sure she was still doing exactly that in 5 minutes. Constitutional rights. The correct and righteous ground he had been standing on for the last 3 minutes became secondary to the single most important objective available to him surviving the next 60 seconds, so that Chloe Webb did not grow up with the memory of watching her father die in a grocery store parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon. He had seen what that kind of memory does to a child. He was not going to let it happen. His hands came up slowly, palms completely flat, and forward-facing fingers spread wide the universal signal of a man with nothing to hide and everything to lose if a nervous finger moves 3 millimeters. He announced every movement before he made it. His voice, a deliberate, steady anchor. I am complying. My hands are visible. My daughter is in the vehicle. Please keep the weapon pointed away from the car, each sentence measured and clear. The voice of a man who understood that in this moment, tone was the difference between going home and not. He went to his knees. The asphalt was sun-baked and rough, and it bit into his skin through the fabric of his shorts, and he registered it and dismissed it as irrelevant. He went the rest of the way down flat on his stomach, hands laced behind his head without being told, because he had been trained in exactly this compliance posture, and he executed it with a precision that was in its own way the most damning possible commentary on why he should have never been in this position at all. Pruitt's knee came down on Marcus's spine, heavy grinding, forcing the breath from his lungs in a single sharp rush, and the handcuffs came on too tight, the metal biting into both wrists, immediately cutting off circulation, which is not a mistake a trained officer makes by accident. And then Pruitt leaned down close to Marcus's ear and said quietly, so the phones might not catch it, though 2 of them did, "Not so tough now, are you? Thought you could smart off to me. You people never learn." 3 sentences, entered into federal evidence 4 months later as Exhibit D. Marcus pressed his cheek against the asphalt and spoke quietly and clearly into the ground beneath him. "You are making a catastrophic mistake." The 2 additional patrol cars came in with their sirens going and their tires pushing smoke angling into the lot. The way backup always arrives fast, loud, projecting the kind of urgent authority that is designed to communicate to bystanders that whatever just happened was serious and that the people arriving now have it handled. 3 officers piled out. They were drawing their weapons before they had fully assessed the scene, responding to Pruitt's radio call, operating on the information he had transmitted, resisting suspect possible grand theft auto officer needed assistance, which was not an accurate description of what had happened, but was an extremely accurate description of the story Pruitt needed told. The last one out of the second car was Officer Tom Briggs, 27 years old, 8 months on the job, and what he saw when he approached the scene did not match the call. A man lay face down on the asphalt in athletic shorts and a gray sweatshirt, hands cuffed behind him entirely, still not struggling, not making noise, not doing anything that the word resisting would apply to in any reasonable reading of the term. Behind the man, the back of a luxury SUV stood open, and inside it were grocery bags, fresh produce visible at the top of one, a box of strawberry cereal in another, and from the rear passenger door came the faint tinny audio of a children's cartoon, cheerful and entirely out of place. And somewhere behind that sound was a child, and Briggs felt a specific unease he didn't have a name for yet settle in his chest. Pruitt was performing for his colleagues. Puffed chest, clipped sentences. The practiced language of departmental justification refused lawful orders. suspected grand theft, auto resisting arrest. I had no choice. I assessed a threat. The other two officers were nodding in the way that officers sometimes nod when a senior colleague is narrating a scene, deferring automatically to the person with more years and more confidence, the way institutional culture trains people to do before they've had time to think. Briggs didn't nod. He was looking at the open trunk and the grocery bags and the cartoon sounds and the man on the ground who had not moved a single unnecessary muscle since they arrived. Pruitt directed him to retrieve identification from the suspect. Briggs approached Marcus and said quietly and professionally that he was going to reach into his pocket, and Marcus told him calmly, face still against the asphalt, that the wallet was in his front right pocket, and to be careful when he pulled it out. Briggs noted the instruction. He noted the tone. He reached into the pocket of the athletic shorts and pulled out a sleek, black leather billfold. He opened it. The first thing that caught the afternoon sun was not a driver's license. It was a solid gold star set in a silver shield pressed deep into the leather, heavy and unmistakable, and beneath it was a credentials card with a photograph and a name, and the words in clean official government font, United States Secret Service Counter-Assault Team Special Agent, and a clearance designation that Briggs did not need to look up to, understand the significance of. Tom Briggs stopped breathing for approximately 3 full seconds. He looked at the badge. He looked at Marcus Webb lying face down on the asphalt with his hands cuffed behind him and blood beginning to appear at both wrists where the metal had cut into the skin. He looked back at the badge. He looked up at Dale Pruitt, who was still talking, still performing, still narrating the story of his own righteousness to the other two officers who hadn't yet seen what Briggs was holding. Dale, Briggs said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Dale. Pruitt ignored him, still talking. Brad. Louder this time, the word landing hard enough to cut through the performance. It's real. He's federal. The sentence hit Pruitt the way a door hits a wall, sudden full stop. He crossed the distance in 3 steps and snatched the wallet from Briggs's hand and looked at it. And for 3 seconds, the cartoon still playing the crowd, still recording the sun, still golden and entirely indifferent. Dale Pruitt stood in a parking lot holding irrefutable evidence of the most catastrophic error of his professional life, and his brain simply refused to process it. It's a prop, Pruitt said. His voice had lost something. It's fake. Where did he buy this? From the ground, face still pressed to the asphalt, Marcus Webb began to speak, and his voice for the first time in the encounter was not the voice of a man trying to de-escalate a volatile situation. It was the voice of a federal agent clarifying the terms of a rapidly changing landscape, calm and precise, and carrying the particular authority of a man who has briefed cabinet members and is entirely unimpressed by the size of your chest. He told Briggs to look at the holographic seal on the credential. He told him to look at the microprinting on the border. He told the officers that inside the Tahoe's center console lockbox was a federally issued Sig Sauer P229, and that they were not to attempt to open it. He told them he was currently the detail leader for a protected political asset visiting the state the following morning. And then he told them clearly, without heat, that Officer Pruitt had unlawfully detained a federal agent, drawn a lethal weapon on an unarmed citizen without probable cause, and done both of these things on camera in front of a growing crowd of witnesses. Briggs was already looking at the phones. There were 11 of them visible from where he stood, and not one of them was pointed at the ground. Pruitt took one step backward, then another. The wallet was still in his hand. The world he had operated in for 12 years, the one where he arrived, and people folded where the badge was a skeleton key that opened every door and closed every complaint, was coming apart in the August sunlight with the speed of something that had always been built to fail, and he was the last person in the parking lot to feel it happening. It came in quietly, which was somehow more impressive than if it had come in loud. The black Chevrolet Suburban moved through the lot without sirens, without the theatrical aggression of the local patrol cars navigating the blockade of police vehicles, with a calm authority that communicated without a single word that the people inside it did not need to announce themselves. because the situation had already been assessed and the response had already been decided. It carried covert federal plates and darkened windows, and it pulled to a stop with the kind of precision that only happens when the driver has been doing this for a very long time and knows exactly where he needs to be. Special Agent in Charge Raymond Cole stepped out first. He was in his mid-50s, silver-haired, wearing a charcoal suit that was not flashy, but was absolutely correct. The way everything about Cole was correct, measured, deliberate, projecting the quiet authority of a man who has been trusted with consequential decisions for long enough that the weight of them no longer shows on his face. Two agents in tactical gear came out behind him, hands resting near holstered weapons, moving to flank positions without being told. Cole did not look at Dale Pruitt. He walked directly to Marcus Webb, who had been brought to his feet and was rubbing circulation back into his wrists, and asked for a report with the matter-of-fact brevity of a superior officer checking in on a subordinate in the field. Marcus straightened and gave it the posture, shifting subtly but unmistakably into something more formal, the casual dad from the parking lot receding and the federal agent surfacing with the ease of a man switching between two languages he speaks equally well. Unlawful detainment, assault under color of law, firearm drawn without probable cause, and then with a precision that said everything about his priorities. "My daughter is in the vehicle, sir. The scene is not yet secured." Cole turned and looked at Pruitt for the first time. He didn't speak immediately. He simply turned and looked, and Dale Pruitt, who had spent 12 years making people feel small, with a look experienced what it felt like to be on the receiving end of genuine authority, and his legs actually stepped backward without his conscious direction. One small involuntary retreat that every single person watching registered and that none of them would forget. When Cole spoke, it was brief and absolute. Pruitt would not move his hands. Any movement toward his belt would be interpreted as a lethal threat. The FBI's Civil Rights Division had been notified 12 minutes ago. A lieutenant from the Oak Creek PD was 2 minutes out. Pruitt opened his mouth. The words that came out were the familiar architecture of self-protection, Union Protection's chain of command. He hadn't known there was a misunderstanding, but they sounded different now in this parking lot surrounded by federal agents and 11 recording phones and a crowd that had stopped pretending not to watch. They sounded like what they were: excuses. From a man who had run out of things to hide behind. Briggs quietly removed the handcuffs from Marcus's wrists. The sound of them dropping to the asphalt, that sharp metallic clatter, cut through the ambient noise of the lot and seemed to function as a kind of punctuation mark, a small definitive sound for the end of one version of events and the beginning of another. Lieutenant Frank Harrison of the Oak Creek PD had spent 11 years trying to be the kind of supervisor who made his department better from the inside, which meant 11 years of fighting a very specific kind of institutional gravity. The pull toward protecting your own closing ranks, absorbing complaints, writing memos that no one acted on, sitting in meetings that produced nothing except the agreement to have more meetings. He was tired in the specific way that principled people get tired when they have been right about something for a long time and been ignored about it equally long. He got out of his vehicle and took in the scene in approximately 4 seconds. The federal agents, the crowd, the phones, the grocery bags still sitting in the open trunk of the Tahoe. The cartoon audio from the rear passenger door, Marcus Webb standing next to Raymond Cole, looking calm and composed and entirely unpanicked, and Dale Pruitt standing apart from everyone holding his own wallet like a man who has just realized it belongs to someone else. Harrison didn't need additional briefing. He had known in the abstract that this day was coming for years. He had filed 2 of the internal affairs reports on Pruitt himself. He had been told politely and through proper channels to let it go. His instruction to Briggs was short and immediate: badge and gun, right now suspended pending termination, not administrative leave, not a desk assignment, not the slow machinery of a disciplinary review board. Terminated. The finality of it was deliberate. Pruitt's collapse was not dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. The arrogance didn't shatter. It dissolved slowly, like something that had been held together by external pressure for a very long time, and simply had no internal structure to maintain its shape once the pressure was removed. His voice cracked. He looked at the other officers, the ones he had worked alongside for years, and found that none of them were meeting his eyes. And the isolation of that moment, the specific experience of being in a crowd and being entirely alone in it, registered on his face as something close to physical pain. Cole and Harrison exchanged a few sentences at the edge of the scene. Brief professional, the logistics of federal involvement communicated clearly and without ceremony. The FBI Civil Rights Division's preliminary involvement was already active. The phones would need to be canvassed. The on-site documentation would be handled by Cole's team. Harrison nodded. Pruitt looked at Marcus Webb, then really looked at him for the first time in the 40 minutes since he had pulled into this lot, and what he saw was a man smoothing the front of his gray sweatshirt with both hands, unhurried, standing in the late afternoon sun, with the absolute steadiness of someone whose identity does not require external confirmation to remain intact. Pruitt had spent 40 minutes trying to make this man small, and the man had simply not participated in the project. Marcus turned away from Pruitt without ceremony and walked to the rear passenger door of the Tahoe and opened it, and the cartoon audio rose for a moment, and Chloe looked up from her tablet with the particular expression of a 4-year-old who has been absorbed in something excellent and has surfaced just long enough to check whether the world outside is still manageable. Marcus's voice, the voice he used with her, was the most transformative thing in that parking lot. Every tactical edge, every federal agent precision, every careful calibration of tone that he had maintained for the last 40 minutes dissolved instantly and completely replaced by something warm and unhurried and entirely unmistakably paternal. He told her Daddy was just finishing up. He told her they were going to get ice cream on the way home. He asked if that sounded okay. Chloe considered this for approximately 1 second, and then told him she wanted double strawberry with tremendous authority for someone her size. Marcus promised. He kissed her forehead. He closed the door gently, and for a moment he stood with his hand on the door handle and just breathed, and the sound of the cartoon resumed inside, and Chloe went back to being entirely unbothered by the world, which was exactly what he had spent the last 40 minutes fighting to preserve. The video was on national news before midnight. There were 6 separate recordings in total shot from different angles at different distances, and together they assembled a picture that was complete and unambiguous. A black man loading groceries into his own vehicle in a public parking lot. Hands visible, complying, speaking calmly and clearly, being handcuffed and forced to the ground at gunpoint by a white officer who had no probable cause, no articulable suspicion, and no explanation that survived contact with the footage. The audio on 3 of the recordings was clean enough to pick up Pruitt's slur, and the audio on 2 of them was clean enough to pick up his whispered taunt after the cuffs went on. And the audio on all 6 of them was clean enough to pick up the sound of Marcus's voice, steady, measured, precise, which functioned in contrast to everything around it as its own form of evidence. The Oak Creek Police Department's press office issued a statement at 11 p.m. that used the phrase "gathering all available information" 4 times and committed to nothing, and by 7 a.m. the following morning, the Department of Justice had announced a federal consent decree placing the department's operations under ongoing federal oversight, which meant that every stop, every use of force, every complaint and its disposition would now be reviewed by people who were not connected to the union that had been absorbing Dale Pruitt's complaints for 12 years. Pruitt called his union representative from his personal cell phone at 9:30 that evening. He had used this number before twice in the context of previous complaints, and both times the response had been reassuring and efficient and had produced the outcome he needed. The conversation this time was different. The union rep had seen the footage and had spent the previous 3 hours on the phone with the organization's legal counsel, and what he told Pruitt was brief and without softening. The union was not in a position to provide representation in a federal civil rights matter, and Pruitt should secure private counsel as soon as possible, and this would be their last conversation on the matter. Pruitt hired defense attorney Gregory Walsh the following week. Walsh was expensive, confident, and well-known in Colorado legal circles for his skill in getting aggressive officers off on officer safety grounds. He had a standard narrative about split-second decision-making and perceived threats and the impossible burden of policing in a volatile environment. And he had used it successfully 14 times in 18 years. And he sat across from Pruitt in his office and projected cautious but genuine optimism. What Walsh did not yet know, what no one outside the FBI knew yet, was that the investigation had already moved well past the parking lot footage, and the ground beneath Dale Pruitt's case was shifting in ways that would make his previous complaints look like minor administrative inconveniences. The trap was already closing. Pruitt was the last person in his own story to feel it happening. FBI Special Agent Sandra Holloway was not a person who used words like devastating or explosive to describe investigative findings, because in her experience, those words belong to press releases and news segments, and not to the actual work of building a federal case, which was painstaking and deliberate, and required the kind of patience that most people found either admirable or deeply unsettling, depending on which side of the table they were sitting on. She used words like sufficient and actionable and admissible, and she said them in a tone that communicated absolute confidence without any of the performance that surrounds it. She had been assigned to the Webb matter 48 hours after the parking lot incident, and by the end of the first week, she had secured a federal search warrant for Pruitt's home, his personal vehicles, and all electronic devices registered in his name or associated with his known accounts. The execution of the warrant was clean and thorough, and produced, in addition to the expected material, a prepaid burner phone in a shoebox on the top shelf of a closet in Pruitt's garage beneath a folded tarp and a box of motor oil. The phone was heavily encrypted. It took the FBI's cyber division 11 days to crack it, which was 4 days faster than the average for that particular application, and what they found inside it was not a supplementary detail in a civil rights case. It was the case. The phone contained access to a private invitation-only messaging group called The Keepers, not on any mainstream platform, running on a dark channel application, favored by people who understood that their communications were not meant to be discovered. The group had 11 members. 9 of them were active duty officers within the Oak Creek Police Department. Pruitt was not the most prolific contributor to the group. He was the most explicit. His messages spanned 3 years and constituted a running log of his conduct on the job, written in the casual performative shorthand of a man bragging to an audience he trusted completely. He described specific traffic stops in enough detail to identify the individuals involved. He described fabricating probable cause in language that was specific enough to constitute a confession. He described using force not as a response to a threat, but as entertainment, as punctuation, as a way of reminding people of their place in an order he believed himself appointed to enforce. The racial language in the messages was not incidental. It was the organizing principle around which everything else was arranged. Holloway printed the relevant extracts, a document that ran to 214 pages, and placed it in a manila folder and drove to Gregory Walsh's office without calling ahead. She set the folder on his desk without comment and sat in the chair across from him while he read the first 20 pages, and she watched him close the folder after page 22 and pick up his phone, and she stood up and showed herself out, and by the time she reached the elevator, she could hear him leaving a message for Pruitt. Walsh's formal withdrawal from the case arrived the following morning via email. 2 sentences. Holloway read it and filed it under Exhibit H. The sequence of departures that followed was not dramatic in the way that legal proceedings sometimes produce drama. No confrontational phone calls, no public denunciations, no moments of theatrical betrayal. It was quieter than that, and in some ways more devastating for its quietness, each departure arriving as a simple administrative reality that left one fewer person in Dale Pruitt's corner and produced a specific measurable reduction in the architecture of his life. The union's formal written statement was released on a Tuesday, 4 paragraphs long, signed by the president who had buried Pruitt's complaints 4 separate times over 12 years. It condemned his conduct in clear and unequivocal language and stated that the organization's obligation was to officers who upheld the values of professional law enforcement, which Dale Pruitt's conduct had demonstrably failed to do. The irony of the author was not lost on anyone who had been paying attention, but Holloway noted it in her case file without commentary because irony was not evidence. 3 of the 11 members of the Keepers group surrendered themselves to federal investigators within 30 days of the search warrants being executed, and they brought with them specific dates, specific incidents, specific names of people they had watched Pruitt target and degrade and falsely arrest over the course of 12 years. Each of them was trying to minimize their own exposure, which meant each of them was trying to be more cooperative than the others, which meant that the picture they assembled together was substantially more complete than any of them had intended. Pruitt's savings accumulated over 12 years of a salary that he had supplemented in ways the investigation was still untangling, ran out in the course of 2 months of private legal costs before Walsh withdrew. He ended up with a public defender named Ray Garrett, a decent man who had been doing this work for 18 years and who reviewed the full federal file over a weekend and came back to the Monday morning meeting with Pruitt looking like a man who had been asked to bring a fishing rod to a flood. What Pruitt experienced in the weeks after his arrest, if you stripped away the specific legal details and the institutional machinery and reduced it to its essential human content, was this. He had spent 12 years operating inside a structure: the badge, the union, the culture, the colleagues, the machinery of institutional protection that had made him feel invulnerable. And that structure was gone, not diminished or weakened, but simply gone. And what remained was a middle-aged man in a rented room with a public defender and a federal indictment and the growing understanding that the world he had built for himself was not going to hold. Within 60 days of the parking lot video going viral, 14 additional individuals filed formal civil and criminal complaints against Dale Pruitt through the federal oversight mechanism that the consent decree had established for exactly this purpose. They had been waiting, most of them for a long time, not waiting for courage, because it does not take courage to know that something wrong was done to you, but waiting for a mechanism that would not simply absorb their complaint and file it in the same place all the other complaints went. The consent decree created that mechanism. Marcus Webb's refusal to be diminished in a parking lot created the context in which the mechanism could function, and 14 people walked through the door. It opened. A 22-year-old college student who had missed an entire semester of classes because a false arrest by Pruitt had resulted in a 3-week detention before the charges were dropped without explanation, without apology, without acknowledgement that anything wrong had occurred. A 47-year-old nurse who had been handcuffed outside a grocery store 3 years earlier. The same grocery store, a different parking lot, a different afternoon, and had not filed a complaint because she was afraid of what happened to people who filed complaints against Dale Pruitt in Oak Creek. A 55-year-old veteran who had tried to file twice and been told both times that the matter was under review and had eventually stopped trying because the process of not being believed was its own form of damage. Each of them gave a statement. Each statement was specific and detailed and corroborated by at least one other piece of evidence: a dash cam recording a dispatch log, a medical record, a text message sent to a family member immediately after the incident describing exactly what had happened while the memory was still raw. The picture they assembled together was not a portrait of a single bad day or a man who sometimes made errors in judgment. It was a portrait of a decade-long pattern of predatory conduct organized around a set of beliefs about who deserved rights and who didn't, carried out by a man who had been protected from consequences for so long that he had stopped believing consequences existed. Marcus Webb testified before the federal grand jury on a Thursday afternoon in November, 6 weeks after the parking lot incident. He testified for 4 hours. He did not speak with anger, and he did not speak with the performative emotion that people sometimes bring to grand jury testimony when they want to be believed. He spoke with the precise, measured, factually grounded objectivity of a man who has been trained to report accurately under pressure, and the grand jury returned a 44-page indictment 3 days later. 6 months had passed, and the federal courthouse on Morrison Street had the particular atmosphere that federal courthouses develop when a case has been in the news long enough that the public has formed opinions about it before the first piece of evidence has been formally admitted, a kind of heightened attention in the air, a sense that the people in the gallery understood they were watching something that would be discussed later, remembered, cited. Judge Patricia Mercer took the bench at 9 a.m. with the unhurried authority of a woman who had been doing this for 22 years and had long since stopped needing the theater of it to feel settled in the room. She was known for two things in federal legal circles: a complete intolerance for civil rights abuses committed under color of law, and a sentencing philosophy that treated the corruption of institutional trust as one of the most serious categories of harm a defendant could produce. Prosecutors who drew her for cases like this one considered it a good sign. Defense attorneys did not. Dale Pruitt sat at the defense table in a gray suit he had bought off the rack because it was all he could afford, and the suit hung on him in a way that communicated without any additional editorial comment that the person wearing it had lost approximately 40 pounds since it was sized. He looked smaller than he was. He looked frankly smaller than he had ever looked, and the people in the gallery who had known him or known of him registered this with a range of expressions that ran from satisfaction to something more complicated and more human. His public defender, Ray Garrett, sat beside him with the organized professional composure of a man who had done the best possible preparation with the available material and was not under any illusions about the scale of the task in front of him. The available material was not good. The federal file was thorough in a way that foreclosed most of the angles that a defense could reasonably work, and Garrett knew it, and he had told Pruitt as much. And Pruitt had nodded in the dazed, affectless way of a man who has been told things for 6 months that his brain keeps trying and failing to fully absorb. U.S. Attorney Catherine Odom stood at the prosecution table and arranged her materials with a quietness that was itself a kind of statement. No flourish, no performance, just the organized efficiency of someone who knows the case is solid and doesn't need to announce it. She was 41, former public defender turned prosecutor, and she had a reputation in federal circles for trying cases with a kind of patient-building precision that juries tended to find utterly convincing because it looked from the outside exactly like the truth being carefully assembled in front of them. The gallery held in its third row, from the back 14 people who had traveled to the courthouse on their own time and their own resources to sit together in a row they had arrived early enough to secure. They were the 14 documented victims. They did not speak to one another. They did not need to. Tom Briggs looked younger in the witness box than he had in the parking lot, which was partly the lighting and partly the particular vulnerability of sitting in a formal proceeding and being asked to recount the most consequential 8 months of your professional life in public in front of the man you are testifying against to a room full of people who will measure your words against everything they already believe. He was pale, but he was steady, and he had not rehearsed in the sense of having prepared a performance. He had simply decided what was true and committed to saying it, which is a different thing and produces a different quality in testimony that juries are generally very good at detecting. He testified to Pruitt's documented history of racially motivated stops. Briggs had personally witnessed during 8 months of writing together stops that followed a pattern clear enough that Briggs had begun keeping a private notebook after his 3rd week on the job, because something about what he was watching did not feel right, and he did not yet know what else to do with that feeling. The notebook was entered into evidence, handwritten, blue ink dated entries in the top left corner of each page, and it contained 37 separate incidents over 8 months, each one described in the careful language of someone who was paying close attention and was not yet sure what he was going to do with what he was seeing. Garrett's cross-examination tried to reframe Briggs's testimony as disloyalty, the suggestion being that a good partner doesn't keep notebooks about his partner, that the notebook itself was evidence of a betrayal rather than a record of genuine concern. It was a reasonable tactical angle given the available options, and Garrett executed it professionally, but Briggs's response to the central question, "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" became the emotional spine of the trial in a way that no one in the courtroom had quite prepared for. He said quietly and without self-justification that he had been afraid. Not afraid of Pruitt, afraid of the institution, afraid of the machinery that had absorbed 9 complaints over 12 years without producing a single consequence. Afraid that bringing what he had seen to the people who were supposed to respond to it would produce a 10th filing in the same drawer. He said that the parking lot had been the first time he'd seen evidence that something outside that machinery existed, and that he had made a choice in that moment that he would have to live with either way, and he had chosen to make the choice he could live with. Several of the 14 people in the third row were nodding as he spoke. Odom did not gloat. She thanked Briggs and sat down. Marcus Webb walked to the witness stand in a charcoal suit that fit him precisely, and the contrast with the gray sweatshirt of 6 months ago was exact and visible and required no comment from anyone in the room to register its full meaning. He took the oath with the calm, unhurried quality of a man for whom public commitment to the truth is not a ceremonial formality but a professional orientation. And he sat and looked at Catherine Odom and waited. He did not speak with anger. This was the thing that the gallery noticed first, not the suit, not the bearing, not the credentials, but the absolute absence of anger in a man who had been handcuffed and put face down on asphalt in front of his 4-year-old daughter by someone who called him boy in a public parking lot. The absence of it was not neutrality. It was something more disciplined than that, something that required more of a person than anger does, and the jury felt the weight of it. Odom built his testimony methodically, establishing his background and clearance level and the specific nature of his work with the kind of patient precision that allowed each element to land fully before the next one was introduced. And she watched the jury's faces as the picture assembled itself. And by the time she asked her first question about the parking lot incident, the room understood clearly what it meant that this man had been on that asphalt. When she asked him to describe his tactical assessment, at the moment Pruitt drew his weapon, Marcus turned slightly toward the jury box and gave them the answer in the voice of an expert witness. Not the voice of an aggrieved individual, but the objective, analytical voice of someone describing a situation they have been trained to evaluate. And he told them that what he saw was an untrained, emotionally compromised individual in an unbalanced tactical stance with his finger inside the trigger guard on a weapon pointed at center mass, actively seeking a pretext to deploy lethal force, and that the statistical probability of discharge given any sudden movement was in his professional assessment unacceptably high. The jury was not looking at Dale Pruitt when Marcus said this. They were looking at Marcus, and some of them were imagining, probably for the first time in the trial, what it had actually cost this man to choose compliance in that moment, what it had required of him specifically to lie down on that asphalt and say nothing and lace his hands behind his head and wait. Garrett's cross-examination tried 4 angles in sequence: provocateur, legal, grandstander man with a grudge, federal operative with an agenda. And Marcus dismantled each of them with the same calm, precise, legally grounded responses, not as a performance, but as a man answering questions he has already thought about thoroughly and has settled in his own mind. And then Odom asked the question she had been saving not for drama, but because she knew it was the one answer that would stay with the jury in the deliberation room when everything else had been debated and re-examined. She asked Marcus what his primary concern had been in the moment the gun was drawn. He paused for exactly 1 beat, the first pause in his entire testimony, and then he said that his primary concern had not been his own safety, which he assessed as manageable given compliance, but had been his daughter, who was sitting in a car seat 3 feet behind him, watching a cartoon, and who was 4 years old, and who he was determined would not grow up carrying the memory of watching her father die in a parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon for the crime of loading groceries into his own vehicle. The courtroom was completely quiet for a moment after he finished. Not the held breath quiet of dramatic tension, but the different quiet of people absorbing something true. Odom played the video after Marcus stepped down. She played it frame by frame without narration and let the jury watch it with everything Marcus had said still in their ears, and the footage was exactly what it had always been, irrefutable and complete. And the jury watched Dale Pruitt's finger inside the trigger guard and his stance and his face. And then they watched Marcus's hands come up slowly with the grocery bag still swinging, and nobody in the courtroom said a word. The jury was out for 2 hours and 47 minutes. When they came back, the foreperson, a retired school principal with 23 years of experience managing the gap between what rules say and what they produce, read the verdict in a clear, level voice that did not rise or fall on any of the counts, treating each one with the same careful weight: guilty, 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 guilty. The words landing in the courtroom with the particular finality of things that have been decided after full deliberation and will not be revisited. Guilty on all counts. Deprivation of rights under color of law, assault with a deadly weapon, civil rights violations 4 counts, the full weight of what he had done formally and permanently on the record. Dale Pruitt's reaction was not dramatic. He did not collapse. He did not weep loudly. He did not make any sound at all. He placed both hands flat on the table in front of him and looked at them, and his jaw tightened once, and then he was very still. And Garrett put a hand briefly on his shoulder and said something quiet that no one else could hear, and Pruitt nodded once with the minimal motion of a man who is trying very hard not to come apart in public. In the third row from the back, one of the 14 victims, the nurse, the one who had been handcuffed outside a grocery store 3 years earlier and had not filed a complaint because she was afraid of what happened to people who tried, reached sideways without looking and found the hand of the woman beside her. The college student who had lost a semester and held it, and neither of them said anything, and they didn't need to. Marcus Webb sat in the gallery 2 rows behind them and watched the verdict land on the man who had put him on the asphalt in the August sun, and felt nothing that resembled triumph, and nothing that resembled pity either. What he felt was the particular quiet satisfaction of a man who had trusted a process and watched it function, who had believed even lying face down on hot asphalt with 2 tight handcuffs cutting into his wrists, that if he held his bearing and let the truth assemble itself, the outcome would be what it needed to be. He had been right, that was all. The sentencing hearing convened 1 week after the verdict, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was different from the trial's slower, heavier stripped of the procedural drama of evidence and cross-examination, and replaced by something that felt more irreversible. The trial had been about establishing what happened. The sentencing was about deciding what it meant permanently in the language of years and walls. Judge Mercer took her time. She looked at Dale Pruitt for a long moment before she began speaking, and the look was not unkind exactly, but it was absolutely without softening the look of someone who has read every page of a file and intends to address all of it. She began with the nature of the harm, not the incident, not the parking lot, not even Marcus Webb specifically, but the operating philosophy, the belief held and acted upon over 12 years that a badge conferred the right to sort human beings by the invisible geography of a zip code and the color of their skin, and that the people who fell on the wrong side of that sorting were entitled to fewer rights, less dignity, and less protection than the people on the other side. She named that philosophy explicitly and said clearly that the courtroom's job was not to rehabilitate it, but to establish for the record and for the future that it produced documented harm to documented human beings, and was not compatible with the authority the defendant had been given. She named the victims by their case file numbers, 14 of them, one after another, which took longer than a name would have, but which communicated in the repetition of the counting the cumulative weight of what a single person's unchecked beliefs can produce across 12 years, when the machinery that is supposed to stop them fails to function. Pruitt was given the opportunity to address the court. He stood with the assistance of the marshal's grip on his left elbow, and he spoke for approximately 90 seconds, and what he said was that he had been doing his job as he understood it, and that he was sorry for any harm he had caused, and that he asked for the court's understanding. Judge Mercer let him finish without interrupting. Then she told him, in the measured tone she used for everything, that his job had been to serve all of them equally, and that he had chosen repeatedly and across many years to serve only his own fear and his own beliefs, and that the court did not have the authority to compel understanding, but it did have the authority to compel consequence. She sentenced him to 14 years in federal prison, 1 year for each of the 14 documented victims, and she noted the correspondence without dwelling on it because the point did not need to be made twice. She noted that the sentence was mandatory minimum under the applicable federal statutes, and that there would be no early parole consideration. The gavel came down with a sound that was not particularly loud, but that seemed to occupy more space than its volume warranted the sound of something final being finalized. And Dale Pruitt heard it, and closed his eyes briefly, and then opened them again and looked at the room around him as if he was trying to memorize it, as if he knew this was the last time he would see it, as if some part of him understood that the world he had organized his life around was not going to be on the other side of the next door he went through. The marshals were already moving. They processed him in the way that the federal system processes everyone methodically, without ceremony, reducing a person to their administrative components with an efficiency that is not cruel in intent, but is comprehensive in effect. His personal belongings were cataloged and confiscated. He was given clothing, a uniform that was the same regardless of what you had been outside these walls that you wore it, and he was assigned a number, Inmate 52847-013, which was the name the system would know him by for the next 14 years. He was placed in protective custody, which sounds in its phrasing like a consideration shown to him, but is in practice the removal of the last form of social existence available inside a federal facility. Because protective custody means solitary, essentially means 23 hours a day in a cell that measured 8 feet by 10, which is approximately the size of the trunk of a 2024 Chevrolet Tahoe. A coincidence that no one in the building was aware of, and that would have meant nothing to anyone there except as a fact about dimensions. There was no audience in that cell. There was no badge, no union, no colleagues, no mechanism by which his authority over anyone or anything could be expressed or asserted or performed. The walls were the same distance away every morning and every evening, and there was nothing on the other side of them that his beliefs could sort or his uniform could organize. He was for the first time in 12 years a man with no external structure through which to define himself, and the experience of that of being reduced to only what you actually are without the scaffolding of what you've told yourself you represent was its own form of consequence, and it was permanent, and it was deserved. The last image of Dale Pruitt in that cell on the first night is a man sitting on the edge of a thin mattress in a room with one fluorescent light and 4 concrete walls, looking at his own hands in the way that people sometimes look at things they can no longer recognize. And there is nothing editorial to add to it, because the image says everything that the story has been building toward, and editorializing on top of it would only diminish it. 1,000 miles away, Marcus Webb's phone buzzed on the granite steps of the federal courthouse. His wife was calling. She told him she had just picked up Chloe from her first week of kindergarten. She said Chloe had spent the entire day telling her class that her daddy was a superhero and had shown precisely 0 interest in any evidence to the contrary. Marcus laughed a real laugh, unguarded, the first one in 6 months, that came all the way up from wherever real laughter comes from, and the sound of it in the afternoon air was its own kind of verdict. He stood on the wide granite steps of the courthouse with the afternoon sun falling across his shoulders and his wife's voice in his ear, and he breathed in a way he hadn't in 6 months. Not the measured tactical breathing of a man managing his physiology in a high-stakes situation, but the simple involuntary breathing of someone whose chest has finally unclenched. She told him about Chloe's week. She told him about the superhero proclamation and the teacher who had apparently been very gracious about it, and the drawing Chloe had made during free period of a man in a gray sweatshirt with a gold star on his chest, which the teacher had framed and put on the classroom wall, which felt to Marcus like the most disproportionate honor he had ever received and the one that mattered most. He told her he was heading home. He told her to tell Chloe he was stopping for strawberry ice cream on the way. His wife laughed and said Chloe would hold him to that with the specific, uncompromising accountability that only a 5-year-old can produce, and he said he was counting on it, and he meant it. He walked to the Tahoe, the same vehicle, the same parking garage, the same keys that Pruitt had tried to demand in a grocery store parking lot on a Tuesday in August, and he got in and started the engine and sat for a moment in the quiet before he pulled out. The courthouse was visible in the rearview mirror for a block, and then it was gone, and he drove toward home through the late afternoon streets of Denver, the city going about the ordinary, excellent business of being a city. And the grocery store parking lot was somewhere behind him and 6 months away, and what he carried from it was not the asphalt or the handcuffs or the gun or the slur. What he carried from it was the knowledge that he had held his bearing when it cost something real to do so, and that the truth had done what it does when you give it room to work. Dale Pruitt's pension was revoked within 30 days of the conviction, irrevocably under the federal statute governing officers convicted of civil rights abuses with no appeal mechanism and no exception. His home, which had been mortgaged against the private legal fees that preceded Walsh's withdrawal, was foreclosed 8 weeks later. His name became a case number in the Oak Creek PD's revised use of force training protocols, cited as the documentation for why the old procedures had failed, not as a cautionary tale told in the abstract, but as specific named evidence used to build something better than what existed before. The 14 people who had filed complaints went back to their lives, which is not the same as saying everything was repaired, because a semester missed is a semester missed, and a night spent in a holding cell based on a fabricated charge is not something a verdict erases from a person's body. But the college student re-enrolled and finished his degree. The nurse went back to work and filed her full statement with the DOJ's Civil Rights Archive, where it will stay as long as archives stay. The veteran, who had tried twice before to be believed and had been failed twice, sent a single email to Holloway 2 weeks after the sentencing that contained 3 sentences that he had been heard, that it had taken too long, and that he was grateful it had happened at all. Holloway printed it and kept it in her desk. Marcus Webb returned to duty the following Monday. Same clearance, same mission, same work that most people will never know happened, and that matters precisely because they don't. On his desk in a small wooden frame his wife had chosen because it was the right size and she liked the grain of the wood was a photograph of Chloe in her car seat. Headphones on tablet propped on her knees, cartoon playing face tilted upward and lit by the screen, and entirely, completely unbothered by the world outside the window. The thing worth protecting. The thing that had already been protected. The thing Dale Pruitt, with his gun and his badge, and his 12 years of unchallenged philosophy, had never come close to touching. If you believe that truth matters even when the machinery meant to serve, it has failed. If you believe that one person holding their bearing in an impossible moment can set something in motion that outlasts the moment itself, then share this story with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe to our channel, because this is exactly the kind of story we called out to tell, and we have been waited a long time to tell it right.